This is Joe Kingman, and he is known for being one of, if not the greatest quarterback of all time for the Boston Rebels.
The King does it again!
A lot of people remember the time that he actually won a Super Bowl in the same year that he found out that he had a daughter. And although there were some growing pains at first, Joe would end up learning from his mistakes, and everything would end up working out. But most people don't know about the challenges and sacrifices Joe had to make in order to become one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. So today, we are putting Joe Kingman into College Football 25. We're going to see just how great he really was, as we'll follow him on his road to glory. Now, coming out of high school, Joe Kingman was the #1 quarterback in the country, and he liked reminding people of that by saying things like,
Now who's #1 on the field and #1 in your heart?
So he knew he wouldn't accept anything other than to be a starter, and he definitely wanted to go pro someday. And he had options to start at some pretty nice schools throughout the country. Even some really big schools potentially wanted him to start immediately. But you see, Joe was from the Boston area, and he really wanted to bring glory back to his city. But he knew that there was only one serviceable college in the Boston area where he could do that at. So when it came to Joe Kingman's college decision, he decided to sign with Boston College. Now, the first thing that Joe did when he got to college was check the depth chart to make sure that he was the starter, which he was, but he also realized that Thomas Castellanos had already taken the #1. And you see, this is actually one of Joe's biggest nightmares. I mean, he hates wearing anything other than #1, because now he can't say things like,
#1 on that field and #1 in your pretty little heart.
But it was all good though, because Joe went to check out the rest of the roster and he was actually pretty impressed. He noticed that they actually had a 95 speed receiver named Jaden McGowan, who he was definitely going to be throwing the ball to. In the first practice, Joe Kingman was doing as well as he always has, but there were times where he may be scrambling a little too much. I mean, he would have a wide open receiver and he would still scramble even though it's 7-on-7. But after settling on the #2, Joe Kingman was ready to get into his first college football game, as Boston College was set to face off against Florida State. In his very first college game, Joe Kingman started off with great field position and did a good job orchestrating this offense downfield up until they got towards the goal line, where he eventually just handed it off to the running back, and just like that, Joe Kingman leads his first touchdown drive, albeit on a short field. Now, one thing that Joe realized was that this offensive line wasn't as good as he might have thought they'd been, because they let up a sack on back-to-back plays to ultimately kill their next drive. But after the Boston College defense comes up with a safety, Kingman gets the ball right back and gets a chance to make something happen. But all he had to do on this play was get the ball out on a wide receiver screen, where Jaden McGowan, the 95 speed receiver, had found a way to work around this defense and get his way down the sideline before speeding his way into the end zone for the first career passing touchdown of Joe Kingman's college football career. And Joe had noticed that McGowan had actually did a Heisman pose, but he didn't want him to get too ahead of himself, because that was an award that Joe Kingman was coming for. He went out there and threw another passing touchdown at the goal line in the second quarter to extend this lead to 24, except the field goal kicker missed the kick, but that's okay, because Joe was about to take his first shot downfield, and somehow McGowan actually comes up with this catch. And then on the very next play, Joe immediately starts scrambling out of the pocket and actually was able to find his way around the edge before diving into the end zone for a touchdown. And it was at this point that Joe knew he was about to help take down one of the top-ranked teams in college football. So he felt comfortable crowning himself the king. And he wanted to prove it even further by going out there and taking another shot, where his guy McGowan would come up with another catch and take this one all the way to the end zone for another touchdown, making this a 37-0 ball game and officially securing Joe Kingman's first career win as a college football player. After sitting out the entire fourth quarter, Boston College would go on to win 44-0. While Joe Kingman led the way with 257 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, already living up to his expectations as the #1 quarterback in the country. And as usual, Joe was actually hyped to find out that they were talking about him on ESPN.
Blessed with crazy strength and ridiculous agility, Joe Kingman could have succeeded on talent alone.
But going into his next game against a 68 overall team, Joe Kingman had a feeling that he was about to go off, especially since it was the home opener for Boston College. So Joe was definitely looking to put on a show against FCS East. At first they actually got off to a little bit of a rocky start, but it wasn't long until Kingman and Boston College would lock in. In the first quarter, Joe had a play where he rolled out to his right and delivered a strike on the run that went into the end zone for a touchdown, the first points of the game. But this was really nothing compared to what Joe Kingman was about to do, because he continued using his legs to extend plays and make huge passes downfield, eventually getting in for his second touchdown of the game in the second quarter. But this is where the onslaught began, because he started just chucking balls up to his receivers once he learned that they were way faster than the cornerbacks. So almost every single time they threw a go route, 9 times out of 10 the receiver would catch the ball and take it into the end zone for a touchdown. And it was almost too easy to throw to 95 speed Jaden McGowan, who actually went on to receive most of the touchdown receptions on this game. And even though Joe at one point would go on to throw a pick, it didn't really seem to matter too much because he would come right back out and throw another great pass where the receiver would eventually take it into the end zone for another touchdown. And Joe hadn't even realized yet, but he actually had one of the greatest games of all time, as he would lead Boston College to an 84-0 victory, the biggest win in Boston College's history. On top of that, he would go on to win Player of the Game with almost 700 yards passing and 11 touchdowns, tying the all-time record for most touchdowns in a game. And by the time the game ended, Joe Kingman's popularity had already grown rapidly. He actually got asked out by one of the world's biggest models, Tatiana, who invited him to come to this party after the game. But when he showed up, he was happy about a lot of people being there to see him. Everybody in the building seemed to know this guy's name. And of course, he would go on to win National Offensive Player of the Week, considering all the recognition he just got. Now, the one thing about the King is that he never stops working, especially since he realized that Boston College won't be facing a very tough schedule throughout the season. So it'll be the perfect opportunity for him to beat up on teams if he can get past this next game, which should be the hardest game of the season, as Boston College is set to face off against number 7th ranked Missouri. Now, this game definitely started off slow, with Boston College failing to pick up a first down on their opening possession. But after getting the ball back with great field position, this Boston College team was working their way downfield and getting themselves in scoring range. And then at the goal line, Joe just took the snap and then took off as he got his team into the end zone for a touchdown, tying this game up at 7. But things started to slow down once again for Boston College, as they weren't able to pick up first downs throughout the second quarter. It wasn't until right before halftime, now down by 14, where Joe felt comfortable taking a shot to his guy. And Jaden McGowan comes up with another catch to bring his team all the way into the end zone for a touchdown, bringing this lead down to 7. After halftime, Missouri gives Boston College great field position once again, but this time they're not able to take advantage of it. And actually, this Boston College offense was shut down completely by the end of the third quarter, because after they settle for another field goal, they eventually find themselves in a position with 1 minute left in the fourth quarter, down by 8. Not to mention it's third down and Joe Kingman is getting sacked. So definitely not the greatest position to be in, but one thing about Joe Kingman is that he never panics. So he takes another shot to Jaden McGowan, who comes up with the catch. But not only that, he takes it all the way to the crib for a touchdown, giving Boston College an opportunity to tie this game up with under a minute left. And on his 2-point conversion, Joe really wanted to take it himself, but he realized there was a guy open across the middle, so he delivers a dime and completes the pass to send this game into overtime, where on the first drive, Boston College is forced to settle for a field goal, but luckily so is Missouri. Unluckily, though, they score a touchdown, though, to take the lead. But Joe Kingman's able to find a guy underneath, who's able to take it around the edge and get it into the end zone for a touchdown, tying this game back up. And Joe really didn't want to, but he lets the running back get a direct snap, and he actually just throws the guy off him before finding a way to get in the end zone for a 2-point conversion, keeping Boston College alive in this game. Then Joe throws a pass for another 2 to take the lead, but Missouri goes out there and puts pressure right back on Boston College. So now Joe was looking to put the team on his back to finally close out this game. All he had to do was come up with a 2-point conversion here, but he ends up throwing an interception that almost went to the crib to end the game, but at least the defense has another opportunity to get a stop, which they do. So now all Boston College has to do is just get one more 2-point conversion, and Joe just takes it around the edge himself and officially ends this game finally, as Boston College would go on to win 45-43 in quadrupled overtime. Now, although it was Jaden McGowan who would go on to win Player of the Game, and Joe Kingman didn't really think too much of it because he still had a pretty good game, and maybe he didn't win it because of those 2 interceptions. He knew he just had to play a little bit better going into his next game against Michigan State. But on this very first play, not only does Joe Kingman get sacked, but he actually fumbles the ball and it gets picked up by Michigan State. And just like that, Boston College is now down by 14 points and is still failing on third down. Now luckily their defense comes out and gives them a break, by giving them excellent field position at the goal line, where Joe Kingman comes out and throws a nice pass down the right side of the field, and the receiver just brings it into the end zone for a touchdown to cut this lead down to 7. But still down by 7 before half, Joe knew that he had to start taking some shots. And this one here landed in the hands of Jaden McGowan to help bring Boston College into field goal range, which they would need to take after they failed this third down. As the fourth quarter came around, it was still a 1-point game, but the momentum seemed to be shifting towards Boston College as Joe Kingman was consistently making plays to help bring his team downfield. And even brought them into the end zone on this run where he dove into the end zone to take the lead over Michigan State. But this seems like it was where things started to heat up, because Joe decided to take another shot deep to his guy Jaden McGowan, who of course ends up making the catch, and brought it into the end zone to extend their lead. Now Joe didn't even have to, but he continued to take shots to Jaden McGowan. And after he goes in for yet another touchdown to extend the lead further, yeah, Joe had to make sure that he wasn't dreaming because this was a little too easy. He even did it one more time in the hopes that maybe if he stat pads a little bit, he'll start getting some recognition for the Heisman. But to many, it started to seem like Jaden McGowan was the real king, as Boston College would go on to win 42-14, and it was actually Jaden McGowan who would win player of the game, with 254 yards and 4 touchdowns, but come on now, I mean, he wouldn't be able to do all that without Joe Kingman. And then after the game, Joe was baffled to find out that someone would even dare ask him who's to credit for Boston College's success.
I'm Joe Kingman, baby! The king of the gridiron. Never say no, Joe.
But unfortunately, most of the country did not agree with Joe Kingman, as most people believe that Jaden McGowan was the reason that they were winning. And although Joe continued to keep his head down and work hard to be better, deep down, Joe Kingman was devastated, because he wanted to be the best player on the team, and he wanted to be known as the reason why Boston College were winners. But going into the next week, Joe started to think about some things that he could do to get himself some more recognition. So he was hoping to put on a show going into his next performance against Western Kentucky. To start this game off, Joe was getting the ball out to his playmakers who were making the most of it, as one of them brings his ball all the way downfield towards the goal line, setting up an excellent opportunity for them to go ahead and score, as Joe Kingman delivers a pass towards the right side of the field, and the receiver falls into the end zone for a touchdown, taking the early lead. Now Joe started to realize that in order to gain favor throughout the country, he needed to show that he was willing to put his body on the line. But he needed to not show that he was going to throw some picks down at the goal line, as he would erase an opportunity for BC to put up some points. He would eventually throw a dime over the middle on the post to his tight end, where they actually scored a touchdown with under 30 seconds left in the half. And Joe continued to try to build on the momentum for his squad. As he dropped back to pass, he eventually rolled out left and decided to take a shot down the middle of the field that was eventually caught again by his tight end, who took it into the end zone for another touchdown, extending their lead. Now, it was no disrespect to Jaden McGowan, but Joe had to prove that he could win a game without throwing him the ball so much. And for large portions of this game, it looked like Joe could do exactly that, as he not only picked up another touchdown towards the end of the third quarter, but he actually comes out and delivers a dime to the receiver opposite of Jaden McGowan, and he actually brings it into the end zone for one of his first touchdowns of the season. And after Joe Kingman would go on to take this ball into the end zone himself for another touchdown, that would effectively put this game away, as the King would lead Boston College to a 42-14 victory over Western Kentucky, with Joe Kingman back in the spotlight with his 6 touchdowns and over 300 yards passing. I mean, he had such a great game, he even had the kids lining up for autographs.
I know what you want. I get it. It's what the world wants. An autograph of Joe Kingman. They all want it. 8-80. You'll probably go sell it, but I'm going to give it to you for free. Because I'm Joe Kingman, humanitarian. Happy New Year.
But you see, Joe knew this could only be just the start, because he had a long season ahead of him. So he knew he had to keep playing well in this ACC matchup against Virginia. Now, out the gate, Joe Kingman was showing that although he was number 2, he was really number 1 on the field, and should be number 1 in your heart, because he was out there picking up first downs with style. He was using his legs to make all the plays that his team needed to get themselves down towards the goal line, where Joe would use those legs again to get in for the first touchdown of the game for BC, tying the game up at 7. A couple possessions later, after getting great field position, Joe was able to get into the end zone again for another touchdown, taking the lead in this game while doing it on the ground. After halftime, though, it was back to a tie ball game. So he figured something that he could do was go back to taking shots to Jaden McGowan. He was just kind of hoping that if he catches it, he doesn't score, which he doesn't. meaning that Joe Kingman could take the ball himself on this read option and get into the end zone for his third rushing touchdown of the game. And now late in the fourth quarter, only up by one possession, Joe Kingman just trying to put the nail in the coffin. So after running his team down to the goal line, he decides to take some initiative and run his team into the end zone, getting himself in for his fourth rushing touchdown of the game, the most ever by a Boston College quarterback. And Boston College would go on to win this game 28-14, with of course Joe Kingman winning player of the game with only 160 yards but 4 rushing TDs. Now after the game, Joe had met this girl Sarah from class. For now, they were only going to be chemistry partners, but Sarah would end up playing a major part in his life later on. Now unfortunately though, Joe Kingman saw that he was still nowhere near that Heisman race, which was kind of crazy to him considering he was third in the country in passing. But it was all good though, because Joe had a feeling that he was actually about to start playing even better. He comes out in this game against Virginia Tech and throws a dime over the top to Jaden McGowan to help his team extend the lead to a 14-7 ball game. And although Joe Kingman was hyped, he knew that he was just getting started, because he would come out right before half, navigate the pocket and throw this beautiful pass on the run, where the tight end takes it around the edge for a touchdown, extending this lead even further. And after Joe decides to take this ball himself, run around the edge and eventually dive into the end zone for a touchdown, that would definitely put this one away, as Joe Kingman would go on to throw for 250 yards and 5 touchdowns. And he was looking forward to keeping things rolling going into an ACC matchup against top-ranked Louisville. And unsurprisingly in this game, it was Joe Kingman who would find a way to put the first points up on the board, as he would bring his team into the end zone for a touchdown for a 7-0 lead in the first half. And probably the most impressive part of his game was his legs. I mean, Joe Kingman was out here saying, "Excuse me," to defenders before picking up big first downs. But he also had one of the best arms on the planet, as he was continuously able to find men open in the end zone for points. But it was the times where Joe Kingman would put his arms and his legs together to make an absolute insane play like you're seeing right here, making this incredible throw on the run before the receiver barely catches it and bounds for a touchdown, leading Boston College to a 35-14 victory over Louisville, with Joe winning another player of the game with his outstanding performance. And in another game against top-ranked team Syracuse, Joe Kingman was starting to get back to throwing to his guy Jaden McGowan, who was back to getting in the end zone for touchdowns after a few weeks of Joe refusing to throw to him, because at this point Joe was already proving that he could win by throwing to other receivers as well. And he was also proving that there was no other quarterback in the country that could come out here and make some of the crazy plays that he was making every week. I mean, it seemed like every Saturday he was having some crazy Heisman moment or making a nice play to get his team in the end zone for a touchdown. And he was starting to feel really confident about being one of the best players in the entire country, as Boston College would go on to win this game 30-0, with Joe Kingman going on to win yet another player of the game for his 3-touchdown performance. And lo and behold, Joe Kingman was finally on top of the Heisman leaderboard. And he felt like it was definitely deserved considering he was one of the nation's leading passers while also adding over 600 yards on the ground. I mean, Joe was out there playing so well that even Tatiana recognized it. And Joe was happy to find out that he might be getting the Triple Gluck Gluck 9000 for playing so well.
Tatiana, I feel my temperature rising. It's hot.
But Joe wasn't going to sit there and get too happy because he still had a lot of games left to play. And he had to come out and take care of business going into his next one against SMU. And unfortunately to begin this game, Joe Kingman started off getting clobbered in the backfield. And he was doing his best to pick up yards on the ground, as he actually picks up a big first down before breaking off this tackle and bringing his team down inside the red zone, where unfortunately they would get stopped in the backfield on third down and be forced to settle for 3. And now down by multiple possessions before half, Joe Kingman knew that he had to come out there and make a play to bring his team back in this game. He would eventually get the ball out to his tight end for a touchdown to cut the lead down to 3 points for SMU. And in the third quarter, after their defense gives them great field position, Joe was able to take this ball up the middle into the end zone for another touchdown, taking the lead, as the King was finally on top in this game. But you see, Joe was out there still trying to make something happen because he would hit the field and get busy. He would even say, "Hey," to a defender before picking up a big 20-yard gain. And then he would eventually take this read option himself before diving into the end zone for another touchdown, extending Boston College's lead. But with SMU still trying to fight back in this game, Joe Kingman knows he has to keep making plays, which he does right here on the run, And after he comes out and throws an absolute dime down the left side of the field, where the slot receiver makes a catch for the touchdown, Joe had knew that he did it again. With Boston College going on to squeak this game out 34-32, with Joe Kingman being the reason why, as he scored 4 touchdowns in this game, along with 133 yards on the ground, his highest rushing total of the season. Now rightfully so, Joe would go on to win Player of the Week, but he knows he has to close out his season strong in his last few games of the regular season. So he went into his next game against North Carolina, motivating his guys to take care of business.
Everybody get on the King's back, and I'm going to lead you to the promised land, all right?
And as much as I'm sure Joe Kingman thought that he was going to come out and lead his team to the promised land, he actually started off by throwing a pick, setting his team down by 7 points by the end of the first quarter, but it seemed like he was already looking to erase it by taking a shot to the left side of the field, where his receiver makes a big catch. And right before the quarter ends, Joe comes out and throws an absolute laser towards the right side of the field, where the receiver makes a big catch in the end zone to tie this game up at 7. But with North Carolina just giving Boston College great field position, they should expect that Joe Kingman would take advantage, getting in the end zone for his first rushing touchdown of the game to help take the lead by 7. But that's when it started to seem like the momentum was going all the way towards Boston College, as Joe Kingman winds up throwing another dime down the right side of the field, where that same receiver comes up with another catch before taking it all the way to the house for another touchdown, so that by the fourth quarter it was the 28-10 lead. And with Joe Kingman coming out there and continuing to move the clock by saying hey to defenders and picking up big first downs, that would eventually put this game away, as Boston College goes on to win 31-10. And shout out to Jerron Bradley for stepping up this game and having a big performance. But with Joe Kingman still working hard to get better throughout the season, he has a feeling that he's going to close out the regular season very strong in his next game against Pittsburgh. But that feeling was pretty short-lived, as he gets sacked on the very first dropback of the game. It was all good though, because he was still finding a way to move this team downfield despite the terrible pass protection. And now it's time for a Heisman-like moment from Joe Kingman, as he rolls out to his left while keeping his eyes downfield and sets his feet before delivering a dime back towards the middle of the field, all while getting smacked and still made the completion. And that right there is why Joe Kingman is the king. He got his team right back down towards the goal line, where he threw the ball underneath and the receiver brings it into the end zone for a touchdown, the first one of the game, extending the lead to 10. But at some point it started to seem like there wasn't really much Pittsburgh could do to keep up, as Joe came out there and delivered another dime towards the right side of the field for another touchdown. And in the second half, a lot of his receivers were just streaking open down the field, so Joe couldn't help but to take more shots and pick up more touchdowns throughout the second half, throwing his last one here late in the fourth quarter down the left side of the field, where the receiver helps to extend this lead and officially put this game away, as Boston College would finish off Pittsburgh 44-7, with Joe Kingman winning another player of the game with 5 touchdowns. And this was actually the best time for Joe to keep working hard on his abilities, because he was about to go into the hardest time of the entire season, as Boston College was about to start playing some real teams. This next one in the ACC Championship against Clemson. But unfortunately, Joe would be up against some adversity because he had some cinnamon French toast before the game. And unfortunately, he actually forgot that he's allergic to cinnamon, meaning that he would have a hard time calling some plays in the huddle.
I said 66, 13 left on 3, on 3. Ready?
And he figured maybe this was kind of affecting the performance of the team, as they were unable to pick up first downs throughout the first quarter. And actually, Joe was getting absolutely demolished in the backfield throughout the first half, as he was continuously getting sacked and brought down to the ground on third down. It wasn't until Boston College was down by 10 where Joe would finally decide to take a shot to his guy, and of course Jaden McGowan would come up with another big catch on the season, bringing this ball all the way to the crib to cut the lead down for Clemson. And actually, right before half, Joe came out and had this great run where he brought his team into field goal range, or they would eventually have to settle for one after he gets clobbered again on third down. Now after halftime though, tied at 10, Joe was willing to put his body on the line to get his team into the playoffs, doing everything he could to not only pick up first downs, but bring his team all the way down to the 1-yard line, where although Joe Kingman comes off the field, they were able to get it in the end zone for a touchdown anyway. Now this was easily the toughest game that Joe Kingman ever played, because he was brought down for his 10th sack of the game with a whole quarter left to play. Regardless, Joe knew that he couldn't panic because he had an opportunity to help put this game away. And he was doing a great job of trying to do exactly that, as he rolls out to his left and has a wide open lane before waltzing into the end zone for a touchdown, extending Boston College's lead. And after Joe comes out and throws another dime over the top to Jaden McGowan, who brings it into the end zone for another touchdown, I just think it's important for y'all to know that the King doesn't play on anything other than Heisman. And after chewing out the rest of the clock, the announcers were giving Joe Kingman all the praise for help leading this team to the playoffs.
Well, Boomer, after their impressive victory today, Joe Kingman and all of Boston will finally get the chance at that coveted trophy, which has eluded them for all these years.
Now, Joe was happy to see that his team was obviously ACC champions now. Plus, he won National Offensive Player of the Week for his performance in the game. But now that it was the end of the season, there were some more important awards being given out, as his head coach actually turned out to win Coach of the Year. But Joe could not help but feel like he couldn't have got that award if it wasn't for Joe Kingman being the Player of the Year. And of course, going on to win the Heisman Trophy. The first Heisman Trophy winner for Boston College since 1984, where Doug Flutie won it. And now that trophy will forever be Joe Kingman's. Now, Joe would actually go on to win a bunch of other awards that he knew he definitely deserved, because he had already almost put up 5,000 yards total with a little over 60 total touchdowns, along with breaking an ACC record for the most passing touchdowns in a season. But he will admit it would have been hard to do without Jaden McGowan, who was recognized for being the third best receiver in the country, arguably number one since he was leading the country in total yards off of only 42 receptions. But Joe was really hoping that he and Jaden could have an even greater connection going into the next game, because now that it's time for the college football playoffs, Boston College was set to face off against easily their toughest opponent all season, one of the top schools in the entire country, the Georgia Bulldogs. And to start this game off, Joe had immediately realized just how good this Georgia team was.
Who's the king now, Joe? I am. Come on, Joe. Get up, Joe. Yeah, baby, let's go.
Because on their first possession, not only would Joe get sandwiched in the backfield for a sack, but they would also fail to pick up this third down conversion. But Joe Kingman was still the king, so he wasn't going to stay down for long, finding a way to move his team all the way down towards the goal line by the end of the second quarter, where Joe would roll out right on this play and throw a dime into the end zone for the first touchdown of the game for Boston College, tying this playoff game up at 7. In the second half, though, Georgia took a 17-7 lead, so Joe was doing everything he could to pick up every single yard. Unfortunately, BC's struggles would continue as they would fail to pick up yet another third down. And still losing by 10 with the clock ticking down in the third quarter, Joe was really starting to feel this pressure as he was taking more and more sacks and oftentimes could barely even get the pass off. Regardless of what was going on though, Georgia could not hold a guy like Joe Kingman all game, as he would find a way to escape out the pocket and move his team all the way downfield into goal-to-goal territory on Georgia's side of the field. And he took it upon himself to take the very next play all the way out to the edge, where he brought this one in for another touchdown himself, cutting down that Georgia lead, and he just had to remind people of exactly who he was. But Georgia would come out and not only score a touchdown, but leave less than 3 minutes on the clock for Boston College to come back. But Joe was doing everything he could to make some nice passes and get his team back into position. But unfortunately, at this point, Joe was kind of flustered and was continuing to take sacks. So on this drive, he had to settle for a field goal and just hope and pray that his defense could come out and get another stop, which eventually they could, giving Joe Kingman another opportunity to lead his team back downfield for a touchdown. And so far, it was looking real good. But he even came out on third down and took a shot to Jaden McGowan, who unfortunately could not come up with the catch, meaning that this game would come down to 4th down and 10, where Joe Kingman didn't even have an opportunity to get the pass off, meaning that Boston College's season would come to a close as they would lose this game to Georgia 24-17. And all Joe could do was watch as Georgia took his glory and were moving on to the next round. And Joe actually had a pretty decent game considering what he had to work with, but still, it wasn't enough. Now, at the end of the season, Georgia would go on to lose in the championship game to Alabama. And you know, for a second there, Joe actually thought about entering the transfer portal, but he wanted to stay loyal to Boston College, as they gave him the opportunity to throw for over 4,000 yards and almost go for 900 rushing yards. Joe also did go on to break many of Boston College's single game and single season records, so he knew he already earned a legacy and was looking forward to building upon it. And this is the story of Joe Kingman so far. And if you want to see more Joe Kingman, be sure to get this video to 1,000 likes and subscribe to the channel down below. Also be sure to comment down below who else you guys want to see in College Football 25. But also be sure to check out some of these other stories while you're waiting for the next one to drop. If you got to this point in the video, just know that I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. I hope all of your college football and NFL teams win this weekend. And other than that, I'm going to catch you guys next time.
Now who's number one on the field and number one in your heart?